What is going on, Notre Dame fans? Mike Singer, Tyler Horka, and Jack Soble live on the Blue and Gold YouTube channel with this week's Notre Dame six-pack show, where we take 6 Fighting Irish topics and break them down 6 minutes apiece. Hope everyone is doing well. If you're watching live, watching back, listen to this as a podcast, whatever the case may be. Thank you for making us a part of your day. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the Blue and Gold YouTube channel. Tons to discuss today with our Blue and Gold beat writers, as well as draft analyst for Pro Football Sports Network. Jacob Infante will be joining us later with the draft coming up this week. Boys, I do trust that you are well, so we'll skip the pleasantries and dive into it. With Marcus Freeman having a press conference today, we did get a update to some injuries. Jack, I'll throw it over to you. What were kind of the biggest takeaways? I know the 2 defensive ends, that was probably the biggest newsworthy item out of the injury report, but overall pretty positive, I would say.
Yeah, the 2 Vipers, Boubacar Traore and Jordan Botelho, as well as the center Ashton Craig being full go for summer. I think that's big. You remember Mitchell Evans last year. I think this is a really important differentiation for us to make. Like, Mitchell Evans was not full go for the summer last year. Mitchell Evans was brought back slowly. I don't think he was fully cleared for football activity until like a week before the season. So I don't know if Botelho, Traore, and Craig are fully cleared for like contact and football activity, but they're very much ahead of where Evans was last year. And that's important to note, because obviously Evans took maybe like half a season, maybe more, to get back to his pre-injury form. So I think that's a massively positive step, particularly with the edge rushers, because I think Notre Dame's really excited about that group this year.
I'm more excited about Ashton Craig being healthy, honestly, because, and we'll get to the offensive line later in this show, but all of spring, I just got a little jaded, a little tired of, whatever you want to say, looking at an offensive line that we knew was not going to be anything like the offensive line that we're going to see this season, August 31st against Miami. So again, I'll talk more about that later, but you do make a good point with guys as pivotal as Botelho and Traore. Like, you want them doing football related activities in May, in June, in July. And when I think about Mitchell Evans last year, you're right, Jack. It was, okay, we're seeing him move in practice and in fall camp, and he would make one cut and like run a route on air and catch a ball in the end zone, and we'd get all excited. I don't want to be excited about stuff like that come August with these guys. Like, if we get to see a full practice in August, I want to see Jordan Botelho fully padded up going against Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, and Boubacar Traore doing the same. So that's pretty big. And then a couple other guys obviously worth shouting out here, Davion Dixon, but more so Gerby Lambert, 2 guys who are going to be working in over the summer, kind of on their own timeline. We got that from Rob Hunt in the spring, right? Like, hey, these are some guys that are going to be doing their own thing. And Lambert was not one of those, but now he is, because he sustained an injury there during spring practice. So I'm still getting questions about Gerby Lambert. Like, I think I saw it on Twitter today when I tweeted out. Again, we'll talk about the offensive line in a minute, but it all kind of goes back to that with this football program all the time. I tweeted out, hey, Marcus Freeman thinks that these 5 guys are probably going to start along the offensive line. And I'm getting questioned like, hey, what about Gerby Lambert? So the fact that he's kind of working back from an injury now, not great, but the sooner the better. The sooner he gets back, the better for him too, because again, as I wrote in my story today at blueandgold.com, the offensive line is a position where expect the unexpected. Chaos is going to ensue. And like, if Gerby Lambert is in that top 2 to 3 guys, maybe even he's, the headliner of that list, if it's not Sullivan Napshire or Joe Otting or somebody like that, you think about the offensive lineman who could replace starters. I think Gerby Lambert is right up there. Like, his time is coming, and it's coming quickly. But when you have an injury like this and you're listed as someone who's not going to be full go in the summer, that kind of sucks. But for Botelho and Craig and Traore to be coming back, that's huge for this football team, because those are starting caliber players, and you want them to be healthy for more of the year than they're not.
The reason I say Botelho and Traore, I feel like it's bigger for them than it is for Craig, is because when you hear season-ending knee injury, the thing you're concerned about when they come back is explosiveness and change of direction. Those are obviously more important for obviously Ashton Craig's a hugely important player for this team, but when you think about explosiveness and changes of direction, that's much more important for a Viper than it is a center. But with obviously we'll talk about the O-line later, but with those two, Botelho and Traore, like the way Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and Chris Ash and Al Washington have talked about that these edge rushers, they feel like it has the chance to be a really, really special group. And I think we saw even pulling from the NFL in the Super Bowl, like the best pass rushes come at you in waves. And it feels like certainly for the first time since I've been on the Notre Dame beat, that like the Irish have a chance to have multiple waves of really strong pass rushers coming off the edge, whether it's Botelho, Traore, Young, Burnham, Tui Halamaka. Logan Thomas is still a name that we expect to take a step this year. And that's depth, but more importantly, like you need 4 edge rushers who have the ability to rush the passer. Notre Dame did not have that down the stretch last year. And from what we saw, and especially given that Botelho and Traore seem to be progressing like really well from their injuries, and Freeman seemed to indicate like he believes they should be as productive and as explosive as they were last year. Like they were awesome last year. And if we get those, if Notre Dame gets those together for a full season, like that has the ability to be one of the best pass rush groups, I think, in college football. Like they were that good last year. And when you combine that with just the steadiness and solidness of a Burnham and Tui Halamaka, who you know you can trust at the end and Viper on passing on run downs, and you have the ability to turn Young and Traore and Botelho loose, like they were special players last year. And it was a really encouraging update today.
I'm going to take 13 seconds to say encouraging update all the way around, because how many springs do we have someone lost for the season? Like I think about Jabron Payne, Jadarian Price a few springs back. Didn't get any of those like, hey, this guy is done for the year because of what happened in the blue gold game. So that's a huge thing to think about too.
Let's talk some quarterbacks, as we always do with the 6-pack show. There's so many different things to discuss here, so good luck doing it. And I'll pause the timer as I rattle off some different discussion points. The possibility of playing 2 quarterbacks Freeman said he's not close, or excuse me, during spring ball, he was not close to naming a starter. Tyler, I know we talked about this privately a little bit on the board. No mention really of Steve Angeli, the entire presser. I don't think Freeman said like that name came up. Maybe Freeman could have gone out of his way to mention it in the opener, or Kennedy Urlacher for that matter, but no one asked about either of those guys. And then Tyler Buckner's name came up as well, Tyler.
Yeah, we're always going to get Tyler Buckner shout outs and press conferences on the quarterback front, but Steve Angeli leaves. Tyler. Yeah, I don't know. Steve Angeli leaves 3 days ago, and we're already not talking about that guy at all. So I think there will come a time maybe when Marcus Freeman mentions it. I know last year in about a month, I think it was like late May, the media all got together and had lunch with Marcus Freeman and got to do a little round table. It was literally a round table. Actually, I don't know. I think it was more of a rectangular table, but you get the point. We're all sitting around. Yeah. We're all sitting around Marcus. I think it'll come up then because like he's got to talk about this at some point. But right now we're talking about Tyler Buckner and we're talking about CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. Kind of want to start with those 2 guys, though, obviously, because those are the ones we're going to be talking about for the next 4 months until Notre Dame plays a football game on August 31st. I believe him when he says, and this is the one thing that he did kind of allude to Steve Angeli in the press conference today, was he believes that Notre Dame had 3 guys that could start and win football games. I believe him when he says that. So Steve Angeli getting pushed out the door wasn't because he was just like far and away the worst of the 3. Was he number 3? Probably. That's probably the only reason he left. I know there's suspicion out there. Hey, maybe he was 2 and he was going to leave just because he wasn't 1. Who cares what it was? He wasn't 1, but I don't think he was as far off from 1 as I've seen in some of this social media rhetoric and message board fodder. Like he was right there in this thing. And I think that's the biggest thing for Notre Dame is moving Tyler Buckner to quarterback isn't because it's like, oh my gosh, the senior's gone. We don't have any experience. We have no starts. I think Notre Dame has everything that it wants, everything that it needs in Steve Angeli, or excuse me, it did at one point And CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey, like those are your top two quarterbacks. One of those two guys is going to start at Miami. I would be completely shocked if it's not one of those two guys that starts every single game this season. Like Tyler Buchner is not going to start a game for Notre Dame at quarterback this season, but I 100% think that he serves a better purpose in the quarterback room than he does in the wide receiver room. He's throwing passes to the wide receivers half the time that we see him working out with those guys anyway. So might as well throw passes with the quarterbacks, talk to the quarterbacks, work with Gino Guidugli, tell everyone in that room like what he saw when he played Ohio State and South Carolina. And we don't want to talk about Marshall as much, but he started 3 games and all those other guys have not started any. So makes sense for him to move back to that room. It's not an even swap for Steve Angeli and Tyler Buchner, but it's, a body for a body there. And Buckner's mind is more valuable than anything there probably.
Yeah, Riley Leonard has been on record saying like Tyler Buchner was huge in advising him and counseling him throughout this, especially the rough stretch in the early part of the season. I think his veteran leadership as someone who has started games for Notre Dame before. I think it's a no-brainer to move him back to the quarterback room. Obviously he's not playing unless it's like a complete disaster scenario, but I think him being in that room is valuable for them. I didn't ask about Angeli, but I did ask like what gives Freeman confidence to start 2 players who like haven't thrown more than 3 passes in college. And I didn't want to mention Steve Angeli because that wasn't the point of the question, but it was like what gives him confidence to carry those 2 guys with so little experience into camp. And he said it was the decision making mainly, the decision making. Are you making the right decisions? Is probably the most important thing. Delivering the ball, the ability to create plays, maybe when things are breaking down, and taking care of the football. Those are things that we really evaluate, and they've done a tremendous job at doing that. I mean, that's the thing. Like they had good springs, and Notre Dame feels really good about its quarterback room with those 2. The other interesting thing that Freeman said in relation to, I think it's related to what gives him confidence that they can start at Miami. It's and this is almost why, like, even if they're not even like Freeman said, if it's not directly 50-50 in the coach's mind, it kind of has to be heading in to fall camp, because Freeman said they're going to get like the pressure experience, not the game experience, but the experience of like, this is the game-like environment. They're going to put them in pressure situations, and they know that if they don't perform, they could lose out on that job. And Freeman said the experience in those pressure situations in a true competition is going to be big, so that the first time that they feel that pressure isn't going to be when they play Miami.
Yeah, and another thing, just kind of recapping the whole, how do we get to this point with just CJ Carr, Kenny Minchey on the roster? More than ever now, I believe that somebody was always going to leave. That somebody was never going to be CJ Carr, because you're not going to push the youngest one with the most potential out the door. And I don't even know if Steve Angeli got pushed out the door as much as it was like him making his own decision. I would have liked to have heard that from Freeman today. If I would have asked the question instead of giving you guys the live updates, that's what it would have been. But again, there's a point where you can read between the lines in Marcus Freeman's press conference today where he says, we weren't going to be able to persist with 3 quarterbacks. We just weren't going to be able to do it. So Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, one or the other was always going to go out the door. Maybe you held on to 2% of hope that somebody would stay and be fine with being number 3, but these guys are too competitive for that.
I discussed my thoughts about the whole Angeli situation in depth last night, so I won't add anything on that. Good stuff, guys. Jack, seems like the offensive line is set. Like it definitely, like Freeman was, pretty, I don't know, adamant about that.
Jack? Yeah, Freeman pretty much confirmed that today. Like he said, I'll pull up the direct quote. Like those are going to be Anthony Knapp at left tackle, Billy Schrouth at left guard, Ashton Craig center, Charles Jagasaw right guard, Emil Wagner right tackle. He said those are 5 guys. We would assume those are your 5 starters. That's as close to naming a starting group at this time of year as Marcus Freeman's ever going to come at this point. So there you go. Those are going to be, unless something changes, your 5 starters on the Notre Dame offensive line. That's a group who it's such an interesting dynamic because they've all started games, but you have Charles Jagasaw, who I think has played in 3 games, maybe 4 or 5, including like garbage time and special teams in his college career. You have Anthony Knapp, who's got a ton of game experience, but he's only a true sophomore. You have Ashton Craig, who's only started like 6 games, but that counts for experience when, in this day and age in college football. So you have 5 guys who have all started games to varying degrees, and who all have the ceiling Notre Dame wants in their offensive linemen, which Marcus Freeman discussed as well. The big game experience, talented players, high ceiling guys, and he said like guys like Joe Otting, Sullivan Absher, Gerby Lambert, those guys are at least they see right now all depth. So I think Absher can play anywhere, Lambert at tackle, Otting at center, like those Styles Prescott at tackle. Those are your primary reserves, but I would be really, really excited about this group if I were a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah, excited is exactly the word that Marcus Freeman used today. I think he said, I'm really excited about the depth. But then the other words that he used, big game, big moment. And that's why I think that these starters are pretty much set in stone, because you go across the board. Let's start with the tackles, actually, work from outside in. And you have Knapp and Wagner. Knapp started 15 games. The only one he didn't start was the national title, and he would have if he didn't get injured in the Orange Bowl. Wagner started all 16 games. So, yeah, they were in big games. They were in every game. And then you go on the inside. Billy Schrauth, he missed that little middle part in the middle of the season, but he came back for the college football playoff, and he was in all of those. And he was there for the Texas A&M game at the start of things. So, like, this is a guy who has been in those big games, those big moments. And then Ashton Craig is the only one that's like, or Charles Jagasaw, you mentioned as well. He's only played in 3 games, but he came off the sideline in the Orange Bowl and played tremendously well enough to the point where they're like, hey, you did really good at right guard. We're going to leave you at right guard. And that kind of shocked some people's minds, but we're over that now. And we're like, it makes sense. He's going to do that. He's going to be that guy at that position. So then getting back to Ashton Craig, it's like maybe he's the one that hasn't played in these big games, these big moments, but Texas A&M from the start of the season, he's the team's starting center. He goes out there and eventually only plays 2.5 games in the whole season because he was one of those casualties at Purdue that I don't know what the heck happened on the field that day, but Notre Dame lost way too many players to injury in that game, and he was one of them. But you go through the entire spring slate here, and for Joe Otting or Sullivan Absher, whoever it's going to be, it's not going to be Cam Herron, a true freshman. They better be like a center prodigy to be able to take Ashton Craig's spot away, because I go back to what Joe Rudolph and people were saying about Ashton Craig, especially working in tandem with Billy Schrauth last fall. People were like, yeah, that's the interior tandem, the duo that's going to move people and is going to make our offensive line really solid from the inside out. And then again, I started this conversation by going with the outside in. The tackles, they're set in stone, man. Combined for 31 starts in one season, that experience, counts for something. And then I guess you can kind of stick on Knapp in that conversation, because I think Wagner did enough, both with durability and just the way he played last year. You're leaving him there. So then you look at Anthony Knapp, and it was like, okay, was he just starting out of necessity, or is he actually the guy at left tackle? You listen to Joe Rudolph, you listen to Marcus Freeman, his teammates have his back. He's a confident kid himself. We know that enough speaking to him throughout the season and then into this spring. Jack, it all makes sense. It seems like if those 5 guys stay healthy, as good as a Will Black might be, or a Gerby Lambert when he's healthy, or Sullivan Absher, this utility man that seems to be able to play all 5 spots, it seems like all 5 spots are taken, and that's just because the guys that Notre Dame has there are really good, and everyone believes in them, starting with the head coach, through the position coach, and then down on through the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think you mentioned those Rudolph comments, and like obviously Freeman pretty much confirmed it today, but that was when everything really fell into place, because it was like the storyline before spring was like, how do you find the best 5? You would assume Lambert's going to make a big push, but obviously that can't happen if he's not healthy and participating. But then you hear Notre Dame thinks Knapp is a natural tackle, and they liked how he performed, especially down the stretch last year. Obviously, he was overwhelmed at times, but like he was a true freshman playing left tackle. Of course he was. And they think Jagasaw can be one of the best guards in the country. And when you hear those two things, then the chess pieces start to fall into place. So that's going to be your 5. And this is, I think, this is going to be my first year in 3 seasons on the beat that Notre Dame has an offensive line that's fully set entering fall camp. And given how much chemistry there is at given how much chemistry is important in that room, I think that's a big thing for this Notre Dame offense.
We'll stay with you,
Mike,
Jack. Go ahead.
Let me two things, because I'm going to be hopping off early for the last two segments, right? Offensive line, Jack. It's never set in stone until it is. We should know that based on last year when Knapp and Pendleton did what they did in the fall. And then I thought it was also really interesting that Marcus Freeman, he talked about high ceiling. That was another, if I'm going to talk about the words that he used to describe this offensive line, we got to do that. He said that Billy Strouth and Emil Wagner are the closest to their ceilings of anyone in that unit. And there's a lot of really good guys in that unit. So I thought that quote stood out too.
All right, Tyler, we'll go to you on this one. Freeman's view on the 2025 team, spoke pretty highly of this group. Really excited about it?
Yeah, he's cautious, though. So if we're picking buzzwords, this isn't one that he said, but, Jack, when we were talking about this show going into this segment tonight, I think you put it into good perspective, because Marcus Freeman of old, and you got to go back a couple of seasons now, probably his first national championship, this national championship, that. He might have even done it the next year. He was just trying to set a tone for what this Notre Dame program is and what he wants it to be under his leadership. But he probably said that word a few more times than he should have. Here he is coming out of a national championship game. If Ohio State wasn't going to win this thing, Notre Dame was. They were right on the precipice of this. But he's not mentioning that. He's saying, yeah, I think we can be pretty good, but we have to do all these things to be that good. And we got to remember what made us so good last year to go 14-2 and get all the way there. So I think he is cautiously optimistic. I think we're all cautiously optimistic. And then I just kind of run through the position groups. I don't really see any that are going to be glaringly worse than they were last year. I know we have our spats about the wide receivers, but one thing I do agree with you on that is that they should be better. Absolutely could be better than they were last year. It's trending upward. The quarterback can even be better. I know the offense is going to be different, but if this becomes a pass first offense and you have a really good passing quarterback, then yeah, the quarterback might be better at throwing the football anyway. And the wide receivers are going to be better at catching it and scoring and doing all these things. The running backs are the same guys that they were. The offensive line, we just spent so much time talking about them. They're probably going to be better. The offense as a whole should be better. And if that's the one thing that held Notre Dame back a little bit last year, that should make you feel good. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's just somebody asked me in the Hey Horka thread the other day, can Chris Ash do what Al Golden did? And I said, yeah, probably. And if Notre Dame does, then I think the personnel is still in place to be that good. And it's going to come down to third downs and red zone and fourth down and all those big areas. I think that's where it makes or breaks a defense. And if you can just tap into the guys' mindsets to do exactly what they did last year on those fronts, I think in 2025, Notre Dame has maybe as good or better of a football team than it did last year. Now, does that mean they're going to take the next step? Again, the next logical step, one step forward, would be actually winning the national championship. Doesn't always work out like that because schedules are different, teams are different. Maybe somebody out there is just far and away the best team in the country, and we're going to have to, learn that as it goes. But by and large, from a South Bend perspective, from a blue and gold lens, I think you're looking at a really good football team. And based on the way that Marcus Freeman spoke today, I think he knows that and he realizes it as well.
Yeah, I'm honestly more optimistic about this team than I was at the start of spring practice. That could come from a number of places. I think the main place it comes from is the way they've talked about the defensive line and the edge rusher specifically, because on the defensive side of the ball, the secondary is probably going to be worse. You can't lose a Xavier Watts and everything that he was to this team and everything that he covered up and that's the one thing that I don't think they can replace. I think the secondary is going to be really good, but they might take a tiny step back on the back end. But I think they can enhance that is the buzzword that Freeman and Ash keep using, and now Washington too. They can enhance that by being way, way better on the edge specifically. And obviously health had a lot to do with that last year. Cross was a shell of himself. Mills was out by the end of the season. Trevor and Patel are obviously out. But I feel better about the D tackles than I did at the start of spring ball. I feel really good about the edge rushers, and I think that group can be pretty excellent. and dangerous rushing the passer this year, and that's going to make the secondary's life easier. That'll let them sit back in zone a little bit more, which I think they realize they probably shouldn't play man as much as they do, because then you run into Jeremiah Smith and you're like, well, they don't really know how to play zone effectively, so they were kind of screwed to some extent in that game. You also mentioned a good point, like last year we were so concerned about the offensive tackles, and it's like that's a big red flag. Obviously they got that stabilized with Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp, and that's a big reason they won 13 straight games. 2 years ago, they had a black hole at wide receiver, and that was a huge reason. Obviously they weren't perfect in every other area, but like that was a big reason they lost 3 games. I really don't see where Notre Dame can have an obvious weakness this year. Like I think they can be underwhelming. Like obviously we're projecting a lot with the defensive line. We're projecting a lot with the wide receivers. The quarterbacks, of course, we're projecting. But I don't see a super low floor for any of those spots. Like I think we're going to be projecting the difference between like really good and just pretty good or okay. And I like where this team is at. I don't know if they're going to go 11-1 again because they have a new quarterback, first time starter, and the schedule is more difficult. But I like this team a lot.
Yeah, I think low floor is where you nail it there. Ceiling, who knows how high, but the floor, if it's always not too low, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot.
Mike, you're
muted, Mike.
I haven't done
First
that in like 3 or 4 weeks.
First time in a while.
I'm proud of you for the streak.
It's been broken though. Tyler, good stuff today. You had 8 points, which I don't know where that puts you in the standings all time, but 8 points today. Good work today, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna swap out Tyler Horka and bring in Jacob Infante, who is a draft analyst for Pro Football and Sports Network. With the NFL draft, of course, coming up this week. Let's just dive right into this, Jacob. Man, Xavier Watts stock up, and if you're talking about maybe like this time before the season, or like this time last year before the football season, Watts stock up big time, and Morrison with the injury. We're looking at him as a first-round pick, and I'm not a big draft guy, but just looking at some mocks, it's like, is he a third-rounder now? Jacob, what are your thoughts on those two guys?
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll start with Watts, and, yeah, first and foremost, appreciate you guys having me. I think that Xavier Watts, you look at that particular, he's, I mean, a 2-time All-American, that speaks for itself. Yeah, I think you turn on the tape, you watch a player who's incredibly instinctive, you watch a high-motored football player, somebody who's got impressive range and coverage, somebody who, okay, maybe he wouldn't be the highest level, like high tester sort of safety, but I think that his game speed speaks for itself, the fluidity, the quick diagnosing ability, the ability to act upon his reads and then shoot downfield or to, accelerate coming out of his breaks. I like him a lot in coverage, and I know that he's had some inconsistencies against the run, but I think the thing that's the most important is that he tries, and I think that's something you don't see with a ton of defensive backs, honestly. So I have Watts as my number 33 overall prospect, so that would put him just outside of the first round in like super early second round. I actually have him above Nicky Manwari, the South Carolina safety who put together incredible testing at the combine, but I think Watts is a better football player right now. I think you look at a guy like that, and that's someone who can stick around the league for a long time. So he's my top player on Notre Dame coming into this draft class. And Morrison's an interesting case because I think, when I was watching him heading into this past summer, I saw someone that's like, all right, if he stays at this level, he's going to be a first-round pick. And I think the injury has, soured many people on him. I don't know. I think that there's a little bit of concern about his play speed, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think that, okay, maybe he's not going to be a 4.3 40-yard dash type of guy, but I see someone who's fluid. I see someone who can change direction well in coverage and mirror route concepts pretty well. I see someone who has the mentality and, the physicality. Even if he's not the biggest corner out there, he has the wherewithal and the effort to jam receivers near the line of scrimmage and press coverage. I think, a little inconsistent against the run, and I think the injury is what's really front of mind with a lot of people with Morrison. But I know some of these mock drafts have him in like round 3. I don't agree with that. I think he'll be a second-round pick, and I think he's got the potential to really make a team super happy in the second round, because I think you're looking at the top corners in this class. I mean, Travis Hunter, if you count him as a corner as opposed to a wide receiver, Will Johnson from Michigan, and then Jahdae Barron, the nickel out of Texas. I think Morrison's right up there with that next tier of guys. I certainly think his 2023 was the best of the rest of that bunch for sure. Now, if assuming the medicals come back all right, which I have no reason to think that they shouldn't, I think he's someone who could stick around as a starter for a long time. So I have him as number 51 overall. The injury does knock him a little bit for me, but I do think that there's a lot of talent there, and I think he's someone who could really surprise a lot of people wherever he gets drafted.
I'm curious about the Watts eval, because you're, I think, higher on him than the consensus. The consensus is probably like a mid-second rounder. You have him as very high second rounder. Like, where does he stand out that maybe others aren't seeing? Because I know the concerns is like size and speed with him. It's not, the ceiling might not be as high, but what do you see with him that maybe others might not?
Yeah, so, and this isn't a one-to-one comparison by any means. I think that these two players do have some differences in their games, but I get some shades of Antoine Winfield Jr. coming out when I watch Xavier Watts, because I think a lot of the concerns with Winfield revolved around his size, revolved around his consistency as a tackler, but you watch the IQ. I think it's a matter of maybe he doesn't have the highest athletic ceiling, but I think that's something that's really important that not enough people prioritize, is the fact that he can act upon his athleticism much better than a lot of other safeties in this class. There are some guys who are going to be faster, but they don't play as fast because they don't necessarily know what they're doing. I don't necessarily think that's the case with Watts, because I think he's a very sharp processor. He picks up on route concepts well. He's, has a good understanding of what's going on around him. And I think he plays with high effort. I think that, size, he's not the biggest guy, but I don't think that's the end of the world with him. So, Watts is someone that I'm significantly higher on. I liked Winfield coming out. That was a win for me. Obviously, I've had my fair share of losses as well. All draft analysts do. But I look at Watts as a relatively similar player, and I think there's a lot to like with him. So he's someone that I'm pretty high on.
Yeah, and with Morrison, like ifs and buts are tough in the draft process, but like, where do you think you would rank him if he didn't have the hip concern? Because obviously a lot of teams are going to see cornerback with hip injury, and like that's obviously huge for that position.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if he didn't have the hip concern, I think he'd be a first-round pick. I think especially like 2024, I mean, obviously there's not as big of a sample size there. He still looked good. It's not like there was a massive drop-off necessarily. I still think his 2023 was a little bit better, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, he's someone, the production was there, the tape is there. He's another, high IQ sort of football player who has, good athleticism, good instincts, and he maximizes his athleticism with how sharp he is in terms of how he recognizes route concepts and how he's able to, kind of mirror the movements of opposing wide receivers. So I think if Morrison didn't have that injury, I think we're looking at him as a first-round pick.
Yeah,
Jacob, this guy's a seasoned pro. It's his first time on the show, and he's already staying before the buzzer. Nice job, Jacob. Let's move to day 3 guys, the free agents. Who do you really like from Notre Dame's group?
Yeah, so one guy in particular, he's not the highest of the bunch that I have outside of Watson Morrison. I do like Howard Cross, and that's something where—
Do you think he gets drafted, Jacob?
I think he does. I at least think he should. And when I turn on the tape with him, obviously, the size, the length are concerns with him, but he's a spark plug. He really is. He's athletic. He's explosive. He can create good initial penetration into opposing backfields. He plays super hard. And I think that he's an intelligent football player too, who can, maybe has a better understanding of, how to string together moves, how to stack and shed blocks. I do have Riley Mills higher than Howard Cross because I think Mills, he's bigger, he's stronger, he's got longer arms, he's a little bit more of an NFL toolsy type of guy, but I think Cross is the better football player right now, at least what I've seen off of those two guys on tape. They're both talented players. They both should get drafted, but Cross is someone I really like a lot. And a little bit, I think a little bit higher even than those guys. You got Mitchell Evans, someone I think that it's a pretty good tight end class. So I don't necessarily expect Evans to go any earlier than honestly like round 4, but he's a sure-handed tight end. He's coordinated. I don't necessarily think he's elite in any particular physical or athletic aspect of his game, but I think he's got the potential to be just a rock solid sort of like a hybrid U tight end, where I think he can move well enough to where he can win out of the slot sometimes against zone coverage. He can line him up out wide sometimes maybe if you want, but I think more of an inline or a slot type of guy. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be like a high-end starter by any means, but I think he'll start off as a good tight end 2 right out of the gate with potential to be a little bit more than that going forward. A little bit further down the line, I'm kind of interested in Jordan Clark, the quarterback that Notre Dame's gotten. I think he's fallen under the radar a little bit, but I do think that wherever he ends up, he has the potential to outdo his draft positioning. He's a smart, scrappy slot cornerback, and I think that all the snaps that he took at Arizona State, all the snaps that he took at Notre Dame, I think that it shows in the intelligence that he demonstrates in coverage and in run support as well. I mean, he's graded up and down as a tackler over the last couple of years, but again, I do think that there's effort there. So I don't know if Clark is going to be drafted necessarily because he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, he's not the fastest, but he's a good football player. So I think that's someone where you take a look at some of the underrated, undrafted, or late round slot cornerback type of picks. I think that Clark kind of fits that mold. So again, will he become that? I don't know, but I do think that I do think coaches are really going to like him in the NFL. Like you turn on the tape, you see there's a lot to like there, and coaches are going to be happy that there's a lot to work with.
I obviously can't end the show without talking about Riley Leonard a little bit. It feels like he's one of the more polarizing quarterbacks who's obviously, aside from the first rounders who are always polarizing, but I've seen anywhere from like 4th rounder to I wouldn't draft him. You have him as 246 on your board, which is like a 7th round grade. What do you see out of Leonard, and what would be the case for a team taking a shot on him?
Yeah, so I do have Riley Leonard. I have a draftable grade on him. When I do have him in like that 7th round, I honestly think he's going to go a little bit higher than that, just because teams might put a little bit more positional value onto the quarterback position with that draft stock than I do necessarily. I think that there's something to like with Riley Leonard as a backup in the NFL. I mean, he's got a solid enough arm. He can move pretty well. I think, from a mechanics perspective, I still think there's a little bit to work with. It's a little bit of an elongated throwing motion. The footwork can improve a little bit, and that can affect his accuracy from time to time. But I think he has tools, and I think that that's something you want to take a shot on day 3. And he's shown, especially in his time at Notre Dame, I'd say he came into that with pretty high expectations, and he wasn't ever necessarily elite, but he's a pretty dang good college quarterback. And I think that you have a guy who can, you can trust on the bootleg, you can trust on play action. He's a threat with his legs. He's someone who's, got enough velocity behind his throws. And, I think got a little bit more consistent with his accuracy as time went on in college. Whether or not he can be that type of guy who can consistently look past his first read against a more physical and a faster NFL sort of defense, I don't know. But I'd certainly draft Riley Leonard. I think that if you're looking for like a developmental sort of backup prospect, he's someone who, when you compare him to, maybe say some other day 3 sort of quarterback prospects in this class, like maybe a Curtis Rourke out of Indiana, Will Howard out of Ohio State potentially. I think Leonard's got a better arm than those guys. I think he's a little bit more athletic. So I think that there's something to develop there. And, if a team's willing to take a shot on him, I have him round 7, maybe round 5 or round 6. I think he could be good value there.
Back-to-back rounds. Jack, Tyler, you guys going to learn from Jacob. Jacob, appreciate you hopping on the end here, talking some Notre Dame in the NFL Draft. BlueandGold.com will have all the written coverage of where the Notre Dame guys get drafted, free agency tracker, all that good stuff. If you have not done so yet, folks, please hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. If you're listening to this as a podcast, appreciate you. Please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. That's it for this week's Notre Dame Six-Pack Show. We'll be live again tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, with the Notre Dame recruiting update this week. It's a Thursday, not the Friday usual spots, because I'm off on Friday. Appreciate you all for watching, and we'll catch you next time.